Dad, the whole family wants to take you out to dinner this weekend. That call made me happy all week. I polished my shoes, wore my late wife's favorite shirt, and drove my son, daughter-in-law, and her family to an upscale restaurant. When we arrived, my son said, "Wait in the car, Dad. We'll get the table ready." 3 hours later, I saw them laughing inside at a table with no seat for me. Then my daughter-in-law handed me $50. "Thanks for driving. Consider it taxi fare." I said nothing. But the next morning, one phone call changed everything. Before we go any further, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. Drop a comment and tell me what country or city are you watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and educational purposes. Any similarity to real names or places is entirely coincidental. But everything it teaches, I believe, is worth carrying with you. It was a Monday afternoon, October 6th, and I was on my knees in the backyard pulling dead roots out of the soil when my phone rang. My hands were caked with dirt. My knees had been aching since around 2 o'clock. They always do when I stay low too long on cold ground. I almost didn't get up. Most calls these days are telemarketers or my doctor's office reminding me about a follow-up appointment I've already written on the calendar. Neither one is worth the effort of standing, but something made me pull off my garden glove and check the screen. "Derek!" I sat back on my heels and stared at his name for a moment. My son didn't call on Monday afternoons. He texted usually short messages that said everything and nothing at the same time. "Hey Dad, hope you're good?" No question mark, no follow-up. The kind of message that checked a box without opening a door. I pressed answer. "Derek, hey son." "Dad?" His voice came through bright and quick the way it does when he's in a good mood or running on something. With Derek, those two things have always looked identical. "How are you doing? What are you up to? Just working in the yard?" I said, lowering myself onto the back step. The wood was cold right through my jeans. "Cleaning up your mother's old garden bed. Been meaning to get to it for a while." "That's great, Dad." There was a half-second pause, the kind that means he's circling toward the real reason for the call. "Listen, so Claudia and I were talking, and we thought it's been way too long since we all got together. We want to take you out to dinner. This Saturday. Somewhere really nice downtown." My chest did something it hadn't done in a long time. Shifted almost. Like something that had been sitting heavy just moved an inch. "Dinner," I said. "Yeah, a real sit-down. Somewhere nice. We want to celebrate a little." "What are we celebrating?" "Just family. It's been too long. You know how it gets, Dad. Life gets busy." I did know how it gets. I'd had 2 years to learn exactly how it gets. Since Margaret passed, "life gets busy" had explained a lot of empty Thanksgiving birthdays acknowledged by text and Christmases that shrank to an hour on the way to Claudia's parents' place. But I didn't say any of that. "That sounds wonderful, son," I said, and I meant it. "Saturday works just fine. Perfect." I heard the relief in his voice. At the time, I didn't think much about why it was there. "Oh, and Dad, could you drive your cars bigger? More comfortable for everyone. We'll all pile in." "Of course," I said. "I'll drive." "Great. We'll sort out the details by Thursday. Love you, Dad." "Love you too, son." The call lasted 4 minutes. I know because I kept looking at the screen after he hung up the way you do when you want to hold a moment a little longer than it lasted. It was just past 3:30 in the afternoon. The yard was quiet around me. October in Portland has a particular kind of stillness in the late afternoon. The light comes in low and gold, and the air smells like wet earth and something winding down for the season. Margaret used to pull her chair out here even in the cold, wrapping both hands around a cup of tea, watching the light change. She said fall in Portland was the most honest season, nothing pretending to be something it wasn't. I looked at the corner of the garden bed to my left. That was where she'd grown lavender purple all summer long, the bees going crazy over it every July. After she died, I let it go. I didn't have the heart to pull it out myself, so I let it die on its own schedule. The patch had been bare dirt for nearly a year. I stood up slowly, brushed the soil from my jeans, and went inside. It was 3:45 when I opened the closet in the bedroom. Way in the back behind the rain jackets and the old flannel shirts was the navy blue Oxford blazer. Margaret had bought it for our 40th anniversary. We went to a restaurant in the Pearl District, just the two of us, candlelight and cloth napkins. And when I came out of the bathroom, she looked up and said, "Nathan, you look distinguished." "Distinguished," I told her. "That's a nice word for old." She laughed, that real laugh, the one that went all the way up to her eyes, and she stepped forward and fixed my collar with both hands, quick and sure, the way she'd done 1,000 times. "Stop it," she said. "You look handsome." I took the blazer off the hanger, held it up in the late afternoon light coming through the window. A little dusty at the shoulders. I gave it a gentle shake and hung it on the back of the door. Saturday was 5 days away. I stood there in that quiet bedroom holding the hanger and felt something move through my chest that I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Not quite excitement. Something quieter. Something that sat closer to hope than anything I'd felt since the funeral. I didn't know why I was already counting the hours. I hadn't felt that kind of anticipation to 2 years, the kind that puts a low hum in your chest at 6 in the morning before you've even had your first coffee. Tuesday morning, October 7th. I ran the blazer through a gentle wash cycle and hung it on the bathroom door to dry. While I stood there watching it, like it might do something, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Derek. "Hey Dad, restaurant is the Capitol Grill downtown. Smart casual dress code. See you Saturday? Smart casual." I read that twice. Then I walked to the bathroom mirror and looked at myself the way you look at something you haven't really examined in a while. I needed a haircut. By 10 o'clock Wednesday morning, I was in the chair at Ray's barbershop on Hawthorne. Ray Kowalski had been cutting my hair for 11 years, big guy, Polish-American hands, like catcher's mitts, but somehow the most precise pair of scissors in Southeast Portland. He had the radio on low and a client in the waiting chair reading a magazine when I came in. Ray took one look at my face and said, "You look like a man who just found out he has somewhere to be. Dinner Saturday." I told him, settling into the chair. "My son's taking me out. Nice place downtown. The Capitol Grill." Ray raised an eyebrow in the mirror. "That's the one." Ray let out a low whistle. $80 steaks, Nathan." "I know. So what are we doing today?" He ran his fingers through my hair, assessing. "Clean it up, all of it. Make me look like I belong at an $80 steak place." Ray laughed, a real laugh from the chest. "That I can do." For the next 20 minutes, he worked and talked the way Ray always works, and talks never quite sure which one he's doing more of. He told me about his daughter's soccer tournament, about the new Vietnamese place opening up on Division Street, about how his brother-in-law bought a boat he couldn't afford and was already trying to sell it. "How's your grandson?" he asked midway through trimming my sideburns. "Owen good, I think." I caught my own eyes in the mirror. "Haven't seen him in 7 months." Ray's scissors paused for just a beat. 7 months. "Life gets busy," I said. Ray didn't respond to that. He just went back to work, and the quiet that followed felt like its own kind of comment. When he was done, he dusted my shoulders and turned the chair so I could see myself straight on. I sat up a little straighter without thinking about it. "There," Ray said. "Now you look like somebody's father." "I am somebody's father." "Then act like it." He said it with a grin, but his eyes were serious for just a second. "Go have a good dinner, Nathan." I tipped him $8 over the usual and meant every cent of it. Thursday morning, I drove to Powell's Market to find something for Owen. My grandson was 8 years old, Derek and Claudia's boy, built exactly like Derek at that age. Same wide-set dark eyes, same habit of tilting his head when he's turning something over in his mind. The last time I saw him was March, 7 months back. He'd spent the whole visit talking about robots his friend Charlie had a building kit, and the two of them had made a whole obstacle course in Charlie's basement. Owen described every single piece of it, arms going a mile a minute, voice climbing higher the more excited he got. I stood in the toy aisle for a solid 20 minutes with my reading glasses on. An employee, young woman couldn't have been more than 20, stopped and said, "Can I help you find something?" "Robots," I said. "My grandson is 8. He loves robots." Her face lit up. "Oh, the Lego Technic robotics set is perfect for that age." She pulled a box off the shelf and handed it to me. "My little brother has this one. He's been building it for 3 weeks and he won't put it down." "How much?" $43. "I'll take it," she smiled. "He's going to love it." "I hope so," I said. "I haven't seen him in a while. I've got some catching up to do." She didn't say anything to that, just carried the box to the register for me, and I was grateful she didn't make it into a conversation. Thursday afternoon, I wrapped the gift myself at the kitchen table, blue paper from the roll Margaret had kept in the hall closet, still half full, which felt like a small gift from her. I tied a white ribbon around it and wrote the card by hand. "For Owen, can't wait to see you Saturday. Love, Grandpa." I set it down and looked at it for a moment. Then I picked it up and carried it out to the garage, setting it carefully on the passenger seat of the Suburban, so I wouldn't forget it. The Suburban, I'd bought that truck for Derek 3 years back. A Chevrolet Suburban, 7 seats, $54,000. Too much car for just me rattling around southeast Portland. But Derek had a family, and it made sense for them to have something with room. He brought it by on weekends when they needed the space. The rest of the time it lived in my garage and I drove it for grocery runs. I spent the rest of Thursday afternoon cleaning it. Wiped every surface down, vacuumed the mats, twice took a rag to the inside of the windshield, where condensation had left faint ghost streaks. By 4 o'clock, it looked like it had just rolled off the dealership lot. Friday evening, 6:15, I put on the Blazer. It hung loose at the shoulders. I'd lost some weight in the past 2 years, not a dramatic amount, but enough that clothes remember you differently than you remember them. I went to the dresser and dug out the brown leather belt Margaret had given me our last anniversary. I threaded it through the loops and turned back to the mirror. Better. Not perfect. Better. I stood there in the quiet bedroom for a long moment. 72 years old. Hair cut tight and clean. Shoes I'd polished for 45 minutes the night before. Margaret's Blazer on my shoulders, hanging just a little loose like a hug that didn't quite close. And in the garage on the passenger seat of a $54,000 truck I bought for my son Owen's gift, sat in its blue paper with the white ribbon still crisp. I had no idea it would still be sitting there untouched when I drove home alone that Saturday night. Saturday came the way the best days always seemed to, quietly, without ceremony, like it didn't know what it was about to mean. I was up by 6:30, even though I didn't need to leave until 5 in the afternoon. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the backyard in the early morning light. The bare lavender patch caught my eye the way it always did. I looked away. By 4 o'clock, I was dressed. Blazer pressed, shoes shined, Owen's gift on the passenger seat right where I'd left it Thursday. I sat in the kitchen and watched the clock move from 4 to 4:30 to 4:45, feeling like a kid waiting for the school bus on the first day of the year. At 5 on the dot, I pulled out of the driveway. The drive to Lake Oswego took 22 minutes. Derek and Claudia's house sat on a quiet street in the Hallinan Heights neighborhood, cream-colored siding, black shutters, a stone walkway I'd helped pay for when they renovated 2 summers ago. I pulled up at 5:25 and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing. "Okay, Nathan," I said to myself. "It's just dinner." I walked up the path and rang the bell. Derek opened the door. He was dressed sharp charcoal suit, white shirt open at the collar, hair combed back. He looked good. He looked like the kind of man who belonged at the Capitol Grill. He took one look at me and his face opened up into a grin. "Dad, you made it." He pulled me in for a quick, one-armed hug, the kind that lasts exactly 1 second. "You look great. Is that the navy blazer?" "Your mother's pick," I said. Something moved behind his eyes, there and gone. "She had good taste." He stepped back. Come in, everyone's almost ready." "Everyone." I stepped inside and stopped. The living room had more people in it than I expected. Claudia stood near the kitchen doorway in a black cocktail dress, earrings catching the light, a glass of white wine already in her hand. She looked up and gave me a smile that landed just short of warm. "Nathan." She crossed the room and touched my arm briefly. "So glad you could make it." She didn't call me Dad. She never did. And then I saw the other four. An older woman stood by the fireplace, mid-60s, silver hair set in careful waves, a string of real pearls at her throat. She had the posture of someone who had decided long ago that she was the most important person in any room she entered. Beside her, a man about the same age, broad through the shoulders, expensive watch, the kind of tan you only get from a lot of vacation time. They were talking to a younger couple I'd never seen before. Derek touched my elbow. "Dad, come meet everyone." He steered me forward. "This is Beverly, Claudia's mom, and Richard, her dad." Beverly turned and extended one hand, 4 fingers, only the kind of handshake that says, "I am doing you a favor by touching you." "What a pleasure," she said, her smile perfectly calibrated. "Derek talks about you constantly." I shook her hand. "He doesn't mention you nearly enough," I said. Richard Harper gave me a firm nod from 2 feet away and didn't close the distance. "Nathan," he said. "Just the name, nothing attached to it." "And these are Scott and Diane Mercer," Claudia said, gesturing to the younger couple. "Scott works with me at the firm. We've been trying to get together with them for months." Scott Mercer, early 40s, good handshake, easy smile. His wife Diane had the kind of bright eyes that suggested she was more perceptive than she let on. They both said hello and asked how I was doing, and I told them fine, and that was the full extent of our relationship for the evening. That's when it occurred to me there were 7 of us, and I was the one with the car. "All right," Derek said, clapping his hands together. "Reservations at 6:30. We should head out." On the walk to the Suburban, Beverly fell into step beside Claudia and said just loud enough for me to hear, "It really is the most practical solution having someone drive." She said it the way you talk about hiring a service. My jaw tightened. I kept walking. In the car I drove and Derek rode in the passenger seat beside me. Beverly and Richard took the middle row. Scott, Diane, and Claudia folded into the back. The conversation flowed immediately. Beverly holding court about their recent trip to Napa, Richard mentioning someone who'd just sold a company for 8 figures, Scott laughing at something Claudia said. Derek turned halfway in his seat a couple of times to join in. "You excited, Dad?" he asked once, turning to me. "Sure am," I said, eyes on the Burnside Bridge. "Really looking forward to it." He smiled and turned back to the others. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and watched the lights of downtown Portland come up through the windshield. The Capitol Grill glowed ahead, warm amber light, polished brass, the kind of place where the menus don't have prices on the version they hand to certain guests. I found a spot on Southwest Lincoln Street, half a block from the entrance. 6:22 by the dash clock, 8 minutes early. Everyone started gathering their things. That's when Derek put one hand on my shoulder and said, "Hey, Dad, give us just a minute to get the table sorted. Wait here. We'll come get you." I turned to look at him. "I can just come in and it's a little complicated with the reservation," he said. His eyes didn't quite hold mine. "Just a couple minutes, I promise." Claudia was already out of the car. Beverly and Richard were halfway to the entrance. Scott held the door for Diane. "Sure," I said. "I'll wait." Derek squeezed my shoulder once. Then he was gone. The door to the Capitol Grill swung closed behind all 6 of them. I sat in the driver's seat in the dark, Owen's wrapped gift on the seat beside me, and I told myself just a couple of minutes. They're sorting the table. It's fine. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word of it. The engine ticked as it cooled. Through the windshield, the windows of the Capitol Grill glowed like a painting I wasn't supposed to be standing in front of. 6:35. I checked my phone, no messages. I told myself that was fine. Restaurants run behind. Tables get moved around. These things happen. 6:45, I called Derek. It rang 4 times and rolled to voicemail. His voice on the recording, "Hey, it's Derek, leave a message." Confident, easy, like a man who never expected bad news. "Hey, son, just checking in. Still out front. Take your time." I kept my voice light. I set the phone on the center console and looked out at the street. 7 o'clock came and went. At 7:15, I called again. Straight to voicemail this time, phone turned off or declined. My stomach dropped a half-inch. I put the phone face down on the console so I'd stop staring at it, and that's when I made the mistake of actually looking into the restaurant. They were right there. Table near the front window, long and beautifully set white linen crystal glasses, candles burning low. All 6 of them. Beverly had her head thrown back, laughing at something Richard said. Claudia was leaning into Scott's wife Diane like they were old friends. Derek sat at the near end of the table, wine glass raised, grinning at something just out of my line of sight. I counted the place settings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. My hands went cold, and it had nothing to do with the temperature outside. I counted again because some part of me, the stubborn, hopeful, foolish part, needed to be wrong. 6 place settings, 6 chairs, 6 people inside the warmth and light of that restaurant. And me in the car, in my dead wife's blazer, with a wrapped birthday present for a grandson who wasn't even there. "They're getting the table sorted," I said out loud to myself, to the empty car, to nobody. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt them dissolve because I could see with my own eyes that the table had been sorted for a long time. The bread baskets were already half empty. Their salads were half eaten. These people had been inside for a while. 7:30. I pressed my forehead briefly against the steering wheel, just for a second, just to feel something solid. Then I sat back up because I was not going to fall apart in a parking spot on Southwest Lincoln Street. 7:45. The street was busy with Saturday night traffic. A young couple walked past my window holding hands, laughing about something. A group of men in Blazers jerseys headed toward the bar district. Portland going about its Saturday, while I sat in a $54,000 truck my son drove to impress other people. 8 o'clock. I was hungry. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and I'd kept it light because I was looking forward to dinner. The irony of that sat in my stomach like a stone. That's when I did something I almost didn't notice doing. I reached into my jacket pocket for my phone, and my thumb hit the voice memos app. I use it sometimes to remind myself of things when I can't write them down. I must have grazed the record button by accident, because when I glanced at the screen, the red recording light was blinking. I stared at it for a moment. I didn't turn it off. I don't know exactly why. Maybe some part of me, the part that had spent 20 minutes counting place settings, already understood that I was going to need to remember this night exactly as it happened, not the way memory softens things over time. 8:30. I watched Jenna, a young server in a white dress shirt, walk past their table with a tray. She glanced out the front window, and for just a fraction of a second, her eyes landed on the Suburban. On me. I thought I saw something move across her face, recognition, maybe, or discomfort, and then she looked away and kept moving. Maybe she knew. Maybe she was just checking the window. I'll never know which. Somebody on that staff knew I was sitting in this car, and nobody came out. 9 o'clock. My chest was so tight it hurt to breathe deeply. Not grief exactly. Not anger yet. Something worse, the slow, awful collapse of something you'd been holding up for a long time without admitting how heavy it was. I looked at Owen's gift on the passenger seat. Blue paper, white ribbon, still perfect. "Can't wait to see you Saturday," I'd written on the card. Owen wasn't even here tonight. Owen had been sitting at home with a babysitter, probably asking where his grandfather was. And nobody had bothered to tell me that either. 9:15. I pulled out a folded receipt from my jacket pocket, all I had to write on, and I started writing. Not sentences, just numbers. The down payment I'd covered when Derek and Claudia bought the house. The check I'd written for the wedding. The amount I'd wired when Claudia's firm had that rough quarter 2 years ago. I wrote until I ran out of space on the receipt, and then I sat there staring at what I'd written and felt something go very quiet inside me. At 9:20, the front door of the Capitol Grill swung open. They came out laughing, all 6 of them loose and bright with wine. Beverly's hand on Richard's arm, Claudia and Diane talking over each other, Scott with his jacket slung over one shoulder. Derek was last still grinning at something Scott had said, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked so happy that my chest cracked straight down the middle. That was my son. That was my boy. And standing there watching him, I told myself he hadn't thought of me once in the last 3 hours. I don't know if that was true, but it felt true, which at that moment was worse. I reached into my jacket pocket and pressed record again on the voice memo deliberately this time. Whatever was about to happen on this sidewalk, I was going to have it exactly as it was. I got out of the car. They came out the way people do when they've had too much wine and too good a time, loud, unhurried, like the cold October night belonged entirely to them. I was standing on the sidewalk beside the Suburban when they spilled through the front door of the Capitol Grill. Beverly had her arm looped through Richard's, her head tilted back mid-laugh at something he'd said. Scott had his jacket slung over one shoulder. Diane was already pulling out her phone, probably for an Uber. Claudia walked out last beside Derek, her heels clicking sharp on the pavement, flushed and bright-eyed from the wine. Derek saw me and his grin flickered just for a half second, just enough before it came back up to full wattage. Dad. Hey, sorry about that. He closed the distance between us and clapped me on the shoulder the way you'd greet a guy you'd kept waiting at a bar. Time just got away from us. 3 hours, I said. My voice came out level. I didn't plan that, it just did. What? He leaned in slightly like he hadn't heard. Nothing, I said. Let's get everyone home. That's when Claudia stepped forward. She reached into the small black clutch on her wrist and pulled out 2 folded bills. She held them out to me between 2 fingers, the way you hand a valet their tip. Nathan. Her smile was smooth as lacquered wood. For the gas and your time tonight. We really appreciate it. I looked down at the money in her extended hand. 2 20s, $40. No, I looked closer. A 50. My hand took it before my brain had finished deciding whether it should. The bill was warm from sitting in her clutch all evening. Thank you, I said, because I didn't know what else to say. Because 72 years of being a decent man had made thank you my automatic response to things I should have pushed back against. And then Beverly Harper, not 2 feet to my left, turned to Richard and said it. Clear as a bell. Voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had never once worried about being overheard by the wrong person. Smart move keeping him outside. Can you imagine bringing him in? He looks like he delivers the groceries. Richard made a sound, half laugh, half breath, and looked away toward the street. My whole body went rigid. Not with anger. With something colder than anger. Something that started in my chest and spread outward to my fingertips until my hand around that $50 bill had no feeling in it at all. I turned and looked at Derek. He was right there. 3 feet away. He had heard every word I could tell by the way his jaw shifted and his eyes went down to the pavement. His hand tightened around his wine-warmed phone. Derek, I said. Just his name. Quiet. He looked up at me. And in his eyes I saw something that was worse than cruelty, worse than indifference. I saw shame. He was ashamed. He knew exactly what had just happened. And he pressed his lips together, swallowed once, and said absolutely nothing. Not one word in defense of his father. Not one syllable. Beverly had already moved on, asking Richard about whether they should stop for a nightcap somewhere. Claudia was checking her phone. The world kept turning like nothing had cracked. I walked to the driver's side door, got in, and started the engine. The drive back to Lake Oswego took 24 minutes. Nobody talked much. Beverly said something about a restaurant in Napa that did a better ribeye. Richard agreed. Derek stared out the passenger window the entire time. I drove with both hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road, and the $50 bill sitting on the center console like a verdict. When I pulled up to Derek and Claudia's house, everyone unfolded themselves from the Suburban. Beverly said, "Thank you for the ride, Nathan," the same way she might thank a hotel shuttle driver. Richard gave me a nod. Scott and Diane said goodnight to the group without specifically saying it to me. Claudia was the last one out. She paused in the open door and said, "Drive safe," and closed it. Derek stood on the curb. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he was going to say something. His mouth opened. His hand came up halfway like he was going to reach back in through the window. "Dad." "Good night, Derek," I said. He closed his mouth, stepped back from the curb. I pulled away. The streets of Lake Oswego were quiet and well lit at 10:45 on a Saturday night. I drove through them and then up onto the highway toward Portland. And the whole time my hands didn't shake, my voice didn't break, my eyes stayed dry. I was so far past the kind of hurt that cries. This was the kind of hurt that just sits there, heavy and permanent, like a stone dropped into still water that never comes back up. I pulled into my driveway at 10:51. I turned off the engine. I sat in the dark garage with the door still open behind me, the cold air coming in off the October night, and I looked at the passenger seat. Owen's gift was still there. Blue paper, white ribbon, not a crease on it. "Can't wait to see you Saturday," I'd written. Owen had been home with a babysitter. He'd never been part of tonight at all. I picked up my phone from the center console and looked at the voice memos app. Still running. I pressed stop. The file was 2 hours and 43 minutes long. I didn't listen to it. Not yet. I just sat there in the dark with my dead wife's blazer on my shoulders and a $50 bill in my pocket and the quiet of the garage pressing in from all sides. I finally went inside at 11:15. I set the 50 on the kitchen table. I hung the blazer on the back of the bedroom door, same hook I'd taken it from 5 days ago. I sat down on the edge of the bed in the dark. "Margaret," I said out loud to the empty room. "I don't know what to do." The house didn't answer. It never did anymore. But somewhere in the back of my mind, something had already started turning. I didn't turn the lights on when I came back to the kitchen. I just sat down in the chair at the end of the table, Margaret's chair, the one with the cushion she'd reupholstered twice because she said the fabric made the whole room feel warmer, and I stayed there. The $50 bill was on the table in front of me. I hadn't moved it. In the dark, it was just a pale rectangle, but I knew exactly what it was. After a while, I said out loud to the empty kitchen, $243,400. That was the number I'd been running in my head since somewhere around 8:15 in that parking spot on Lincoln Street. Derek. The down payment on their house in Lake Oswego, I'd covered $180,000, the full 20%, because Derek said the bank wouldn't approve the loan without a stronger down payment, and he didn't have the savings. $180,000. I got up, went to the kitchen drawer, and took out the yellow legal pad I keep for grocery lists. I sat back down and started writing. Not because I needed to, the numbers were burned into me, but because I needed to see them in my own handwriting on real paper. I wrote for an hour. The wedding, $38,000, because Claudia's family had expected a certain standard, and Derek had called me 3 weeks before and said, voice tight and strained, "Dad, I hate to ask, but..." And I'd said, "Don't worry about it," before he could even finish the sentence. The business Derek had started a consulting firm 4 years ago, Cooper Harper Consulting, and it had needed capital to get off the ground. I'd put in $40,000 as a seed investment, then another $30,000 when the first year came up short. Then I'd co-signed a business loan for $70,000 more. That was $140,000 in that company alone. I'd never seen a dividend. I'd never been asked to a board meeting. I hadn't even known there was a board. Claudia's firm 2 years ago, a rough quarter, and Derek had called to say they needed a bridge loan just to get through the fiscal year. $23,000. I'd wired it the next morning. The renovation, The stone walkway, the new kitchen, the addition on the back of the house. I'd contributed $42,000. Just to help them get settled, I'd told myself. By the time I finished the list, it was nearly 2 in the morning, and the legal pad had 3 full pages. I stared at the total I'd written at the bottom: $423,000. $423,000. I pressed my palm flat against the number like I could push it back into the paper. My eyes burned, not tears, just the particular ache of a 72-year-old man who hasn't slept and has been staring at a yellow legal pad under a single kitchen light for too long. That was more than half of everything Margaret and I had saved in 40 years of working. 40 years of her teaching 3rd grade and me pulling wire through walls and crawl spaces and attic insulation. 40 years of buying the store brand cereal and taking vacations we could afford and driving cars until they gave up on us. $423,000. And tonight they'd handed me $50 to drive the car. I got up and walked to the living room. I stood in front of Margaret's bookcase. She'd kept all her mysteries here. The old Agatha Christie paperbacks, and the newer ones she'd discover at Powell's Books and bring home like treasure. I pulled one out, looked at it without seeing it, put it back. "You knew, didn't you?" I said to her photograph on the shelf, the one from our trip to Cannon Beach. Her laughing at something I'd said, the Pacific gray and huge behind her. "You tried to tell me," she had once, 3 years before she died. We'd been lying in bed reading, and she'd put her book down and said out of nowhere, "Nathan, I worry about Derek. Not his success, just whether he's becoming someone good." I'd told her she was overthinking it, that Derek was fine, that all kids pull away a little when they start their own lives. She'd picked her book back up and said, "I hope you're right." Standing in the dark living room at 2:30 in the morning, I said, "You were right, Margaret. I'm sorry." I went back to the kitchen, sat down, and picked up my phone. I opened the voice memos app and found the file from tonight, 2 hours and 43 minutes. I pressed play and set the phone on the table. For the first few minutes, it was just road noise, muffled voices, the sound of the car interior. Then the suburban door opening, footsteps on pavement, and then Beverly Harper's voice, sharp and carrying and utterly unguarded. "Smart move keeping him outside. Can you imagine bringing him in? He looks like he delivers the groceries." Richard's low laugh, then nothing from Derek. Just the sound of his silence louder than anything else on that recording. I pressed stop. My throat tightened like a fist had closed around it. I rewound it and played it again because I needed to be certain I hadn't imagined, it hadn't softened, it hadn't misheard a single syllable. I hadn't. I saved the file, labeled it with the date, and set the phone face down on the table. Then I sat there with my hands flat on either side of the legal pad, breathing slow and steady, looking at $423,000 written in my own handwriting. I had been patient my whole life. I had been the kind of man who let things go, who absorbed things, who told himself that family was worth whatever it cost. Margaret used to say my greatest strength was my steadiness. She also used to say, and she only said it once carefully, that sometimes I confused steadiness with surrender. At 4:45 in the morning, the first gray light beginning to show, at the edge of the kitchen window, I tore the top sheet off the legal pad, folded it once, and put it in the breast pocket of the blazer still hanging on the bedroom door. Then I picked up my phone and found a contact I hadn't called in 2 years. Martin Schultz, attorney at law. I didn't call him, it was 5 in the morning. But I held the phone with his name on the screen, and for the first time since I'd pulled out of that parking spot on Lincoln Street, I felt something shift in my chest. Not peace. Not yet. But something harder than grief and steadier than anger. Something that felt a lot like knowing exactly what came next. I hadn't slept a single hour. But by 8:30 Sunday morning, I'd showered, put on a clean flannel shirt, and backed the Suburban out of the driveway into a Portland morning that was the color of old dishwater, low clouds, no wind, The kind of sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or just stay miserable. The Bridgetown Veterans Club sat on a quiet block off Northeast Sandy Boulevard, a converted brick building with an American flag out front that snapped even on still days because they kept a small fan mounted behind it. Frank Delgado had brought me here 6 years ago, right after I retired, when he'd noticed I was spending too many afternoons watching the Weather Channel with nowhere to be. "You need a place," he'd told me. "Men without places go soft." Frank Delgado was 74 years old, a 30-year veteran of the Portland Police Bureau who'd worked everything from patrol to homicide before his left knee finally filed its formal resignation. He was broad through the shoulders even now, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too much to be surprised by most things. He'd been my closest friend for 19 years, ever since we'd sat next to each other at a neighborhood association meeting and discovered we were the only two people there who weren't trying to get someone else's fence sighted. I found him at his corner table, with a mug of black coffee and the Sunday Oregonian open to the crossword. He looked up the moment I came through the door, took one full look at my face, and folded the newspaper shut. "Sit down," he said. "You look like you got dragged behind a truck." I pulled out the chair across from him. Carol, the Sunday morning regular behind the counter, brought me a coffee without being asked. She'd been doing that for 6 years, and I'd never once had to ask. I wrapped both hands around the mug because my fingers were still cold from the drive. "I need to tell you what happened last night," I said. "Then start talking," Frank said. "I'm not going anywhere," so I told him. All of it. I started from Derek's phone call Monday afternoon, and I went through every single piece: the blazer, the gift for Owen driving out to Lake Oswego on Saturday evening, meeting Beverly and Richard Harper for what felt like the first time, even though I'd met them at the wedding 5 years ago, and they'd looked straight through me both times. I told him about Derek's hand on my shoulder at the restaurant entrance, the quiet confidence of, "Just give us a few minutes, Dad." I told him about 3 hours in the car, about calling Derek's phone twice and getting voicemail, about finally looking through that restaurant window and counting the place settings one by one. Frank's jaw tightened when I got to the 6 chairs. His eyes went hard and still. I kept going. I told him about Claudia's 2 fingers holding out that $50 bill, the way she'd smiled when she did it smooth and practiced as a hotel concierge handing back your room key. And then I told him about Beverly Harper's voice carrying clear as a bell across the sidewalk. "Smart move keeping him outside," I said, quoting it exactly. "Can you imagine bringing him in? He looks like he delivers the groceries." Frank set his coffee mug down on the table with a sound like a gavel. "She said that," he said, not a question. Clear enough that I recorded it by accident on my phone. I played it back at 2 in the morning to make sure I hadn't imagined it. "And Derek." Frank's voice had gone flat and deliberate the way it did when he was building towards something. He heard her say that. He was standing 3 feet away, and he said nothing. "Not one word," I said. He looked at the pavement, that was all. Frank pushed back from the table and crossed his thick arms over his chest. He worked something through behind his eyes for a moment, and I waited because with Frank, you always waited, the thinking was worth it. "Nathan," he said, finally leaning forward with both forearms on the table. "I have known you for 19 years. I have watched you absorb things that would have broken other men and just keep walking. And I am telling you right now, as the person who knows you best in this city, that what happened last night was not a misunderstanding. It was not Beverly having a bad night. It was not Derek being thoughtless." His voice dropped a register. "That was deliberate. That table was set before you ever got in the car. You were never going to that dinner, Nathan. You were driving it." My throat tightened. I took a sip of coffee so I had something to do with my hands. "He's still my son," I said, "and you are still his father." Frank pointed at me across the table. "Which means you deserve to be treated like one. Not like a shuttle service with a checkbook attached." "What do I do, Frank?" "First, how much money have you given them total?" "Everything." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded legal pad page. I slid it across the table without saying anything. Frank unfolded it slowly. He read it the way he used to read crime scene reports. Methodically, nothing skipped. When he got to the bottom line, he let out a long, slow breath through his nose. $423,000, he said. Give or take a few hundred. Frank refolded the page and slid it back to me. His expression hadn't cracked, but something moved behind his eyes that looked a lot like controlled fury. Do you have a lawyer? Martin Schultz handled Margaret's estate. Call him tomorrow morning. Before you talk to Derek, before you answer any calls, before you do one single thing. Frank tapped the table with one finger for emphasis. You need to know what you own, what you're liable for, and what leverage you actually have. Because right now you're walking into whatever comes next with your eyes closed and blind is exactly how people like Beverly Harper win. I don't want to sue my own son, Frank. I want to be clear about that. I'm not telling you to sue anybody. Frank leaned back and picked up his coffee again. I'm telling you that knowledge is the only protection you've got right now. Find out where you stand. Then decide what you want to do about it. We sat for another 40 minutes. Frank told me about a case from his third year on the force, an elderly retired schoolteacher in Selwood, whose adult son had been quietly draining her checking account for 8 years, $50 here, $200 there. Never enough in any single transaction to trigger a flag. By the time a neighbor noticed she had $11 to her name and no memory of signing half the documents she'd signed, she kept saying he was her son, Frank said. Every time we talked to her, that was the answer to everything. He's my son. Like that was supposed to make the $11 make sense. Doesn't family explain some of it? I asked, and I hated how much I needed the answer to be yes. Frank looked at me steadily. Family is why people get away with it, he said. It's not an excuse. It's a weapon. And the people who use it that way are counting on you to keep believing it's an excuse long after you should know better. I drove home at 12:20 with the folded legal pad back in my jacket pocket and Frank's words sitting in my chest like a fist that wouldn't unclench. The Portland sky had finally made up its mind, and a thin, cold rain was coming down on the windshield. Tomorrow morning I was calling Martin Schultz, and I was going to sit in that chair across from him and hear every single word he had to say, no matter how much it cost me to hear it. Martin Schultz kept his office on the 8th floor of a building near Pioneer Courthouse Square that had been standing since 1924 and looked fully prepared to outlast everything built after it. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves packed with case volumes, a window overlooking the square where the Max light rail ran on its schedule, and pigeons argued endlessly over pretzel crumbs on the brickwork below. I had sat in this same leather chair 2 years ago, signing Margaret's estate papers with hands that kept trembling, no matter how hard I pressed them flat against my knees. Martin was 68 years old, trim silver-rimmed glasses, the kind of deliberate, unhurried manner that came from 35 years of watching people arrive in his office in crisis and learning that most crises got considerably worse when you rushed them. He billed $400 an hour. In my experience, that was the most reasonable $400 a person in trouble could spend, because Martin Schultz never said a single word he didn't mean, and never softened a thing you needed to hear straight. He shook my hand, gestured to the chair, and settled into his own seat across the desk. You said it was urgent, he said. Tell me what's going on. So I laid it out. I told him the full story, the dinner, the 3 hours in the car, the $50, Beverly's voice on the recording. I watched his face while I talked. Martin was good at keeping his expression neutral, but when I mentioned 3 hours in the parking lot, his pen stopped moving for just a moment, and I caught it. When I finished, I put the folder on his desk. Mortgage documents, business incorporation papers, investment agreements, loan receipts. Everything I'd spent Sunday afternoon excavating from the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom, the one I hadn't opened properly since Margaret died. Martin spent 15 minutes reading. The only sounds were the Max train below and the scratch of his pen on his legal pad. I sat straight in my chair and watched the pigeons on the square below fight over the same small patch of brick they'd been fighting over for years. Finally, Martin set his glasses on the desk, folded his hands, and looked at me directly. "All right, Nathan," he said. "Let me walk you through what I'm seeing one piece at a time. Please, the mortgage first." He tapped the document on top of the stack. "You are listed as a guarantor on Derek and Claudia's home loan. You signed a separate guarantee agreement at the time of closing, not the loan application itself. That is not the same as a co-owner. You don't hold title to the property. What it means is that you have personally guaranteed the debt. If Derek defaults on the mortgage for any reason, job loss, financial difficulty, anything, the bank is legally entitled to come after your assets first before they pursue Derek. You are the backstop. You signed this 4 years ago." I felt my jaw tighten. I understood I was helping him qualify for the loan. I didn't understand I was the one on the hook if it went wrong. "Most people don't read co-guarantor language carefully enough," Martin said without judgment. "It's written to be dense. Now the business." He lifted the next document and turned it to face me, pointing to a line midway down the 3rd page. "Can you read that?" I put my reading glasses on and leaned forward. "Nathan A. Cooper, founding investor, 35% equity stake. Cooper Harper Consulting, LLC." The air went out of the room. My chest tightened like someone had put a hand flat against it and pushed. "I own 35% of his company," I said. "You do. When you made your initial capital contributions 4 years ago, the $40,000 and then the additional $30,000, the following year, Derek's attorney drafted an investment agreement that awarded you equity in exchange for that capital. You signed it. It's binding and it's legal." "Derek never explained that to me," I said, and my voice came out harder than I intended. "He called it an investment. He never said I'd have ownership." "He may not have fully understood the implications himself," Martin said carefully. "Or he understood them and counted on you not to look too closely. I can't tell you which. What I can tell you is that 35% equity in a private LLC is a transferable asset. It belongs to you. You can sell it. To who? To anyone willing to buy it. An outside investor, a business partner, a competitor." Martin let that settle for a moment before continuing. "If you sell that stake to a third party, Derek loses majority voting control of his own company. He currently holds 51%. If you sell your 35 to an outside buyer, he drops to a minority position. He would no longer control his own board votes." My hands felt strange in my lap, too warm, slightly unsteady. I pressed them flat against my thighs. "What about the house?" I asked. "You can formally notify the bank of your intent to withdraw as co-guarantor. Oregon law requires the lender to review the loan terms when a guarantor withdraws. Derek would need to demonstrate he can service the debt independently. If he can't qualify on his own, the bank may require him to refinance or, in a worst case, call the loan." Martin paused. "I want to be clear, this does not mean he automatically loses the house. It means the bank takes a hard look at whether the loan still makes sense without your guarantee behind it. And the money I lent Richard Harper." Martin picked up the last document, the handwritten loan agreement on plain paper that I'd found at the bottom of the filing cabinet, the one I'd nearly forgotten about. $20,000 personal loan to Richard Harper, repayment date January 2024. He is now 21 months past due. Martin did the calculation on his pad. With Oregon's statutory interest rate of 9% per annum on unpaid personal loans, he currently owes you approximately $23,150. This is fully collectible through civil court. I stared at the document in Martin's hand. Richard Harper. The man who had laughed at his wife's joke on the sidewalk Saturday night. who had nodded at me in Derek's living room, like I was someone whose name he was working to remember. Nathan. Martin set the paper down and looked at me over his glasses. I need to ask you directly, what do you want to accomplish, not what you're angry about right now. What do you actually want? I looked out the window at Pioneer Courthouse Square. A woman was tossing birdseed near the fountain, and the pigeons descended on her in a gray wave, shoving each other aside, taking everything they could reach. I don't want to destroy my son, I said. I hear that. But I am done, I said, and my voice came out with an edge I didn't plan for, sharp enough that Martin's eyebrows lifted slightly. I am done being the foundation they build on while they act like they built it themselves. I am done signing papers I don't understand because my son calls and says he needs help. I am done being the man who sits in a parking lot for 3 hours and says thank you for the $50. Martin held my gaze for a long, steady moment. Then he picked up his pen, pulled a fresh legal pad toward him, and said, "Then let's talk about what you want to do and how to do it correctly." He began to write. And sitting across from him in that quiet office with the rain coming down on Pioneer Courthouse Square below, I felt something move in my chest. Not relief, not yet. Not anything that simple, but the particular feeling of a man who has finally stopped pretending he doesn't know what he needs to do next. I left Martin's office at 12:15 with a folder of documents under my arm and one clear thought driving everything else out of my head. Before I set any of this in motion, I needed to look my son in the eye one more time. Before I tell you what happened when I walked through that door, when I stood in front of Derek, Claudia, Beverly, and Richard, with everything I had collected, everything I had recorded, everything I had finally counted up, I need to know. Are you still with me? Drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Just a 9. That tells me you're here, and that tells me this story is reaching the people who need it. A small note. Before we continue, the story ahead contains some fictional elements shaped for storytelling purposes. It may not reflect every detail exactly as it happened. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, this is a good moment to step away. No judgment and no hard feelings. Lake Oswego in October looks like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happens. Wide streets, clean gutters, maple trees dropping leaves in colors that look too perfect to be real. I'd driven through this neighborhood 100 times in the past 4 years, and always felt a quiet pride pulling up alongside the stone walkway, the black shutters, the careful landscaping. I'd helped pay for most of it. Today I just felt tired. I parked on the street at 3 o'clock and walked to the front door. My heart was steady. My hands were not. I rang the bell and stood on the front step with Martin's folder under one arm and my phone in my jacket pocket. Voice memos loaded and ready. Claudia answered. She was in a cream blouse and dark slacks put together even on a Monday afternoon, and the look that crossed her face when she saw me lasted only a fraction of a second before she smoothed it back to neutral. But I'd seen it. Surprise, then calculation. "Nathan." Her voice was bright and careful. "This is unexpected." "I imagine it is," I said. "Is Derek home?" Yes, come in." She stepped back. I walked into the living room and stopped. Beverly Harper was on the couch with a teacup in both hands. Richard sat in the armchair by the window with a newspaper across his lap. Both of them looked up with the measured expressions of people who had been warned or were very good at pretending they hadn't been. Derek stood up from the kitchen stool the moment he saw me, and his face did something complicated. Guilt and defensiveness fighting each other for position, neither one winning cleanly. "Dad?" His voice came out careful. "I was going to call you today. I saved you the trouble," I said. I crossed to the center of the room, set Martin's folder on the coffee table, and took out my phone. I pulled up the voice memos app and pressed play before anyone could speak. The room filled with ambient noise from Saturday night street sounds, footsteps on pavement, and then Beverly Harper's voice came through the speaker, clear and unguarded and utterly precise. "Smart move keeping him outside. Can you imagine bringing him in? He looks like he delivers the groceries. Then Richard's low, satisfied laugh. Then nothing. The particular nothing of Derek standing 3 feet from his father and finding absolutely nothing to say. I stopped the recording. Beverly set her teacup down on the side table with a small, controlled click. Her expression had hardened around the edges, but she held herself straight spine like a steel rod. "That's out of context," she said. "What's the context?" I asked. My voice was level. I was surprised how level it was. "It was a private conversation, in a public parking lot," I said, 2 feet from where I was standing. "Private wasn't the priority, Beverly. I just wasn't worth the effort of lowering your voice." Beverly's lips pressed together into a thin line. She looked at Richard. Richard looked at his newspaper. Derek took a step forward. "Dad, can we talk about this calmly?" "I'm perfectly calm," I said, and turned to face him fully. "I'd like to ask you something, Derek. Look at me and tell me, did you know before Saturday that I wasn't going to be at that table?" Derek's jaw shifted. He looked at the floor and then back up at me. "It wasn't supposed to go like that. That's not what I asked." My voice cracked the room like a clean break. "Did you know?" His chest rose and fell. His hands opened at his sides. And in the long, burning second before he answered, I watched my son's face and felt my heart break in the quiet, permanent way that doesn't make a sound. "I knew it would be mostly their crowd," he said finally. "I thought you'd be okay waiting just a little while." 3 hours and 14 minutes, I said. I counted. Claudia made a sound somewhere between a sigh and an objection. "Nathan, I'm not finished." I looked at her, and she closed her mouth. Then I looked back at Derek. $423,000, Derek. That's what I have given this family over 12 years. The down payment on this house, $180,000. Your wedding, $38,000. The company, $140,000 in capital and co-signed loans. Claudia's firm bailout, $23,000. The renovation, $42,000. I paused. "On Saturday night, you paid me $50. The number dropped into that room like a stone into still water, and everything went tight. "You gave us that money," Claudia said, her voice controlled but her face flushing dark. "You chose to give it. Nobody forced." "You're right," I said. "I chose. Because he's my son, and I loved him, and I believed I was building something for our family." I looked at Derek. Tears were threatening behind my eyes, and I refused them, absolutely refused them, because I had not driven to Lake Oswego to cry in Beverly Harper's living room. "But I was not building something for your family. I was building the stage you perform on. And apparently, the stage doesn't get a seat at the table." Derek's eyes went red at the corners. His voice came out rough. "Dad." "I'm done, Derek." The words came out quiet and final. "I am done. No more money. No more guarantees. No more signing papers I don't understand because you say you need help." I picked up Martin's folder from the coffee table. "My lawyer will be in touch about the equity stake and the co-guarantor position. That's not a threat. It's just what happens next." I walked to the door. Behind me, I heard Beverly say something sharp to Richard too low to catch. I heard Derek say, "Dad, wait." But I was already in the entry hall, already pulling the front door open, already stepping out into the October afternoon, where the maple trees were still dropping their too perfect leaves. I drove out of Lake Oswego with both hands on the wheel and the heater running, and the folder on the passenger seat, where Owen's gift had been on Saturday. For the first time since Monday afternoon, when Derek's name had appeared on my phone screen, I felt like myself again. Tired, hurt, and absolutely certain of what came next. I drove home from Lake Oswego and did something I hadn't done in years. I turned my cell phone to silent, left it face down on the kitchen counter, and let the world sort itself out without me for a little while. Tuesday morning, October 14th, I made coffee at 6:30 and sat at the kitchen table watching the backyard in the gray early light. My phone screen lit up 4 times before 7 o'clock. I could see the glow from across the room. I didn't pick it up. At 8:15, I finally checked. 4 missed calls from Derek. 2 from Claudia. 1 from a number I didn't recognize, Oregon area code, but not one I had saved. I put the phone back down face up this time, so at least I could see if Owen called. Owen didn't call, but he also didn't know what had happened. As far as Owen knew, his grandfather had gone to a dinner and come home. I held on to that. On to Tuesday afternoon. Drove to the nursery on Southeast Powell and bought 3 lavender starts, small ones, still in their plastic pots, root balls wrapped in damp cloth. The woman behind the counter, probably 60 or so, gray braids and dirt under her fingernails, set them on the counter and said, "These need full sun and good drainage. Don't baby them, lavender likes a little hardship." "Don't we all?" I said. She laughed. "You've grown lavender before." "My wife did," I said. "I'm learning late." She wrapped the pots carefully in newspaper and put them in a paper bag. "She'll forgive you for starting over," she said, and I think she was still talking about the lavender. Wednesday morning, I called Martin and gave him the go-ahead on 2 things: drafting the formal notice to the bank about my co-guarantor position and sending the demand letter to Richard Harper for the $24,200. Martin said he'd have both ready by end of week. I said fine. I sat at the kitchen table after I hung up and felt something settle in my chest, solid and quiet, like a decision that had finally stopped second-guessing itself. Wednesday evening, Frank called. "You need to see something," he said. "What?" "Claudia posted on Facebook this afternoon. I had my daughter send me a screenshot. You want me to read it to you?" I closed my eyes for a second. "Go ahead." Frank cleared his throat. Quote, "Heartbroken to see someone we have supported and loved choose to walk away from family without a word of explanation. Some people only know how to take. We are leaning on each other and staying strong." End quote. A pause. There's about 60 comments, mostly from her work friends and some people I don't recognize, all sympathetic. Nobody knows your side. The anger that moved through me was fast and hot, and I let it pass before I spoke. "What does Derek say in the comments?" "Nothing yet. Just a heart emoji reaction to the post." I pressed my free hand flat against the kitchen table and breathed through my nose. "Frank, I'm not going to respond. I figured you'd say that. She can say whatever she wants. Every word she puts in writing is one more thing she'll have to account for later." "That's the right call," Frank said. "Smart and patient. Beverly trained her well, but Beverly doesn't know you're holding a recording." "No," I said. "She doesn't." "You need anything? I need you to stop worrying about me." Frank made a sound that was half laugh, half grunt. "Not in my nature. Dinner Friday." "Friday," I said. "Same place." Thursday morning, Martin's paralegal called to confirm the demand letter had gone out to Richard Harper's address of record by certified mail. She said Richard had 30 days to respond before Martin would file in Multnomah County Circuit Court. I thanked her and wrote it on the kitchen calendar, the same calendar Margaret had put up 3 years ago, still the same one because I hadn't found a good reason to replace it. Thursday afternoon, I planted the lavender starts in the corner of the garden bed, exactly where Margaret's old plants had been. My knees ached from crouching on the cold ground, and I didn't care. I pressed the first root ball into the dirt and patted the soil firm around it with both hands, and something moved in my chest that was not quite grief and not quite satisfaction, but lived in the neighborhood of both. Friday evening. Frank and I ate dinner at the diner on Hawthorne. Same corner booth. Same coffee, same turkey melts that were exactly as good as they needed to be and no better. "How are you sleeping?" Frank asked over his second cup. "Better than last week," I said. "Not great. Better. The lavender get planted. 3 starts, southeast corner." Frank nodded approvingly. "Margaret would like that. She'd tell me I planted them too close together," I said. "She'd be right. Frank grinned, a real one, wide and weathered. She was always right. About most things, I said. About all the things that mattered. We sat with that for a comfortable moment, the diner noise easy around us. Derek called me Thursday, Frank said, setting his mug down. I looked at him. What did he say? He wanted to know if I could talk to you. Said you weren't answering his calls. Frank met my eyes steadily. I told him I wasn't a messenger service, and if he wanted to talk to his father, he should try harder. What did he say to that? He said he didn't know what to say to you. I looked down at my coffee. Something tugged behind my sternum, not forgiveness, not yet nowhere near it, but something that recognized that Derek drowning in his own consequences was not the same thing as Derek being my enemy. He was still my son. A son who had stood on a sidewalk and said nothing while his father was called the grocery delivery man. But still my son. He'll figure out what to say, I told Frank, or he won't. Either way, I'm done waiting for him to find the words before I decide how to live my own life. Frank raised his coffee mug. To that, he said. I raised mine and we drank. Sunday evening, October 19th. I was sitting in Margaret's chair reading one of her old Agatha Christie paperbacks I'd started from the first shelf and was working my way through when my phone buzzed on the side table. Not a call. A text. Unknown number, Oregon area code. I picked it up. The message read, Grandpa, it's me, Owen. I'm using Mom's old phone she left in the junk drawer. Are you mad at us? I asked where you were at dinner, and they said you were busy. I don't understand. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time because the words kept rearranging themselves into something I wasn't prepared for. 8 years old. Using an old phone he'd found in a junk drawer, asking if I was mad at him. My eyes burned, and this time I let them. There are moments when the smallest thing cuts the deepest. Not the 6 empty chairs through a restaurant window. Not the $50 bill held out between 2 fingers. Not even Beverly Harper's voice carrying clean and sharp across a Saturday night sidewalk. Just 2 sentences from an 8-year-old boy who went digging through a kitchen junk drawer because he didn't know any other way to reach his grandfather. I read Owen's message 4 times without moving. The Agatha Christie paperback lay face down on the armrest where I'd dropped it the moment the screen lit up. The lamp beside Margaret's chair threw its warm circle across the words. Grandpa, it's me, Owen. I'm using Mom's old phone she left in the junk drawer. Are you mad at us? I asked where you were at dinner and they said you were busy. I don't understand. No punctuation except the period at the end. The timestamp read 11:14 at night. He'd waited until the house was quiet, until the bedroom doors were closed, until the only light left was whatever small screen he'd pulled out of a kitchen drawer and typed into in the dark. My chest felt like someone had reached in and closed a fist around everything inside it. I typed slowly, deleting and rewriting 3 times because every single word needed to be exactly right. Claudia might find this phone. She might check the messages. I had maybe 1 shot to say what needed to be said before this line went quiet forever. Owen, I'm not mad at you. Not even a little bit. I was there that night. I waited outside. I had a gift for you. I still have it. Grandpa loves you very much. Don't you ever doubt that. I hit send and held the phone in both hands, watching the screen like it was the only thing in the room. The house was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator hum from the kitchen. 11:26. The 3 dots appeared. Why were you outside? Did you not want to come in? My throat locked around something jagged and hot. 8 years old, and he had found the most honest question in the entire situation. The one that cut straight past everything. The lawyers, the paperwork, the $423,000, and landed right at the center of it. Did you not want to come in? Like it had been my choice. Like I had chosen that parking spot. Like I had chosen to sit alone in the cold dark while my son laughed with strangers over wine I'd helped pay for. My hand was shaking when I typed back. A real tremor, not nerves, the particular shake that comes when your body understands something your mind is still trying to catch up to. I wanted to come in more than anything in the world, buddy. It's complicated grown-up stuff that has nothing to do with you. None of it is your fault. Not one single piece of it. The only thing you need to know is that Grandpa loves you and I'm right here. 3 dots. They stopped. Started again. Owen thinking it through the way he always thought things through. I could picture him in the dark, head tilted to one side, lower lip between his teeth, the way Derek used to do at that age. Okay, can I see you sometime? I pressed my fist against my mouth for a full 5 seconds. Breathed through my nose until the burning behind my eyes settled into something I could manage. Then I typed, yes, I promise. Anytime you want to come, the door is open. I'll always have hot chocolate ready. Okay, Grandpa. Yeah, buddy. I told them at dinner I wanted to sit next to you. They said you were coming later. You never came. The room blurred. I blinked hard once, twice, and the words swam back into focus on the screen. He had asked for me. He had saved a seat, or tried to, and been told I was coming later, and spent the whole dinner waiting for a grandfather who was sitting in a parking lot 50 yards away holding a wrapped birthday present with a white ribbon. I know, Owen. I'm sorry you waited. That wasn't fair to you. It's okay. Good night, Grandpa. Good night, buddy. Sleep well. I love you. The screen went dark. I sat in Margaret's chair for a long time, without moving. My eyes were wet, and I let them be wet because there was nobody to see it, and because some things deserve exactly the amount of grief they're owed. I thought about Owen saving a seat. I thought about the whole dinner going by course after course, wine and laughter, and Beverly holding court, and this 8-year-old boy looking toward the door every so often waiting for the grandfather, who was 20 feet away in a parking lot, and never came. After a while, I got up and went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water standing at the sink. The backyard was dark, but I knew where the lavender starts were southeast corner left of the fence post. I'd pressed those roots in myself 3 days ago. I changed into work clothes and went to the garage for the hand trowel. It was past midnight, and the October air was cold enough to see my breath. I didn't care. My hands needed dirt. They needed something real and immediate and alive. I worked in the garden by the porch light until 2 in the morning, loosening soil, pressing compost around the base of each plant, checking that the roots had caught. Small and stubborn, just like the nursery woman had said. A little hardship won't hurt them. I thought about Owen typing in the dark, whatever came next with Derek, whatever the lawyers set in motion, whatever the bank decided, whatever fell and whatever didn't. Owen was not going to be collateral damage. That was not something I was willing to negotiate. I went inside at 2:15, washed my hands, and called Martin's office line. Martin, Nathan Cooper. I'm ready to move on both items. Call me Monday morning. I want this done this week. I hung up. Stood at the kitchen in my dirty work clothes, the lavender still under my fingernails. It was time to let go of the building. Martin called back at 8:15 Monday morning. I was already at the kitchen table with coffee and the legal pad in front of me. Same chair, same early light coming in low through the window over the sink. You're sure? He said. No greeting, no warm-up. Martin Schultz had never believed in warming up to the difficult part. I'm sure, I said. Both items, the equity sale and the co-guarantor notice. I want them filed correctly, and I want them moving this week. The co-guarantor withdrawal I can file with First National today. That clock starts running on receipt. The equity sale takes a few more steps. I need to finalize a buyer and prepare the transfer documents. That puts us at Wednesday, maybe Thursday. Who's the buyer? James Whitfield, Martin said. I've identified a potential buyer, someone I believe would be right for this. His name is James Whitfield. Would you like me to reach out to him today? James Whitfield. I hadn't spoken to him in 4 years, but I knew the name as well as I knew my own. 61 years old, started his electrical contracting business with 2 trucks, a tool belt, and a work ethic that made everyone around him look lazy. We'd worked 2 major commercial jobs together back in the 90s, a hospital expansion in Beaverton and a warehouse complex out near Troutdale. He was the kind of man who said what he meant, and meant it the first time. "Does Whitfield know what he's buying into?" I asked. "He does. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, 'If Nathan Cooper's name is on something and he wants out, I want to know why before I decide whether to want in.'" I gave him the general situation. He said he'd heard enough. Something that had been tight in my chest for 2 weeks went loose and quiet. "How much?" "Fair market value for a 35% stake in a company of Cooper Harper's revenue and client base, $85,000. Whitfield agreed to the number without negotiation. $85,000. Money I had put in across 2 rounds, never expecting to see a return, never knowing I was buying anything at all. "Tell him yes," I said. "I'll have the transfer documents ready Wednesday morning, 9 o'clock my office. I'll be there." And Nathan, once this transfer closes, Derek's controlling stake drops from his current position to a thinner majority. He still runs the company day to day, but he no longer has the financial backing that kept his credit profile strong. Whitfield is a passive investor. He won't interfere with operations, but the optics change considerably. "I understand," I said. "The bank notice I'll file this afternoon," Martin continued. "First National has 30 days from receipt to conduct their loan review. Oregon law requires them to notify Derek within 5 business days of receiving my withdrawal filing. He'll know by the end of this week." I looked out at the backyard. The 3 lavender starts in the southeast corner, small and green in the morning light, holding on in the cold dirt, exactly the way they were supposed to. "File it," I said. Monday afternoon, I drove to First National Bank on Southwest 5th Avenue and met with a loan officer named Patricia Greer, efficient professional, the kind of woman who handled uncomfortable paperwork, the way a good surgeon handles a difficult cut cleanly, without hesitation, without making it worse than it already was. She reviewed Martin's withdrawal filing, stamped it received at 2:47 p.m., and looked up at me across the polished desk. "Mr. Cooper, I want to confirm you understand what this initiates," she said. "The co-borrower Derek Cooper will receive formal notice within 5 business days. He'll need to demonstrate independent debt service capacity within the review window. If he cannot qualify on his own, the bank may require him to refinance the existing terms." "Ms. Greer," I said, and kept my voice steady, "I signed that guarantee 4 years ago because my son needed help. I'm withdrawing it now because the arrangement is no longer appropriate. Everything that follows is between the bank and my son." She held my eyes for a moment, with the measured expression of someone who had sat across from a lot of difficult decisions and understood that most of them were none of her business. "Understood," she said. "We'll process this today." I thanked her and walked back out into the October afternoon on Southwest 5th. Traffic noise, a food cart sending wood smoke across the sidewalk, 2 guys in hard hats arguing over a blueprint spread across the hood of a pickup truck. Portland going about its Monday like nothing had shifted, but something had. Wednesday morning, I sat across from Martin and signed the equity transfer agreement. James Whitfield had signed his copy Tuesday evening. Martin slid the document across the mahogany desk, handed me a pen, and I wrote Nathan A. Cooper in the signature line and dated it October 22nd, 2025. "Done," Martin said. "Whitfield holds 35% of Cooper Harper Consulting as of this morning." I set the pen down. "How long before Derek finds out?" "His attorney will receive a formal notification copy today. I'd estimate he knows by end of business." Martin folded his hands. "Nathan, how are you holding up through all of this?" I thought about Owen's message, about 2 sentences typed in the dark at 11:14 at night by an 8-year-old with a junk drawer phone. About saying I wanted to sit next to you. "I'm doing what needs doing," I said. Martin nodded. That's usually enough. Thursday, Martin's paralegal called to confirm Richard Harper had signed for the certified demand letter at his Lake Oswego address at 9:52 a.m. 30 days on the clock before Martin filed in Multnomah County Circuit Court. Richard had not called, had not written. I hadn't expected him to, but there was a particular satisfaction in the certified mail receipt that felt like closing a door that had been left open too long. Friday evening, Frank and I sat in the corner booth at the Hawthorne Diner. Same turkey melts. Same coffee that arrived too hot and was exactly right by the time you got to the bottom of the mug. Derek called me Wednesday night, Frank said, wrapping both hands around his cup. What did he say? Said things were getting complicated. Said Claudia was upset. Said he needed to talk to you. Frank looked at me levelly across the table. I told him what I told him last time. I'm not a go-between. If he wants his father, he knows where his father lives. I turned my mug in a slow circle on the table. He's starting to feel it. That's what happens, Frank said simply. When the floor drops out, you feel it. He picked up his burger and set it back down again, something on his mind. You think he'll come to you, eventually, I said, when he has no other options left. That's not the version of him I want, Frank. But it might be the only version I'm going to get for a while. Frank was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the rain starting on Hawthorne. Then he said, For what it's worth, I think there's more of you in that boy than either of you know right now. I drove home at 9 o'clock in the light rain, the streetlights making halos on the wet asphalt. Pulled into the garage and sat for a moment in the dark before going in. I was done being afraid. I was in the kitchen washing the dinner dishes when I saw the headlights sweep across the backyard fence through the window above the sink. A car pulling into my street, moving slow. Then the engine cut. Then nothing. I dried my hands on the dish towel and waited. 2 minutes passed. I heard the car door finally open and close. Footsteps on the front path, heavier than a stranger's, a little slower than usual. The kind of footsteps that belong to a man carrying something he hasn't figured out how to put down yet. The doorbell rang. I walked to the front door and opened it. Derek stood on the porch under the yellow light, and he looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His collar was open, no tie jacket rumpled across one arm like he'd been holding it since he left the house and forgotten to put it on. His hair, usually combed back neat, had that pushed-forward look you get when you've been running your hands through it for hours. His eyes found mine, and something in them flinched, not from anger, not from confrontation, just from the particular exhaustion of a man who had finally run out of things to hide behind. "Dad," he said. His voice came out rough like sandpaper on dry wood. "I know you're not answering calls. I figured if I showed up, you'd have to decide in person." I stepped back from the door. "Come in." He followed me to the kitchen. I put the kettle on without asking, then turned to the cabinet for 2 mugs. Old habit. Margaret used to say the first thing you do when someone walks through your door is give them something warm to hold. It tells them they're allowed to stay. Derek pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down heavily, like his legs had been making a decision they'd only just followed through on. He set his jacket over the back of the chair and looked around the kitchen the way you look at a place you grew up in and have been away from long enough that it looks smaller than you remembered. "First National sent a letter," he said. I set both mugs on the table and sat across from him. "I know. They're reviewing the loan." He looked at me, jaw tight, eyes red at the rims. "Dad, if they don't approve me independently..." "Derek." My voice came out level and final, the way it had come out in his living room 11 days ago. "I know what it means. I signed those papers, too." He pressed both hands flat on the table. "So you pulled it, without talking to me first." "I tried talking to you," I said. "In your living room, with your mother-in-law sitting on the couch and your father-in-law pretending to read a newspaper." I picked up my mug. "That was my conversation. You had your chance." Derek's jaw worked. He stared at the table for a moment, then looked back up at me. James Whitfield called me Wednesday afternoon. He introduced himself as my new minority shareholder. A short, humorless breath escaped him. I didn't even know you owned 35% of my own company. Neither did I said. Not until I sat down with Martin Schultz and he showed me what I'd signed 4 years ago. Something moved through Derek's face, not guilt exactly, but the uncomfortable cousin of it. I thought it was just an investment agreement, he said. You didn't think I'd ever look closely enough. I said it without cruelty, just as a plain fact sitting on the table between us. You were probably right. I probably wouldn't have if they hadn't left me in a parking lot for 3 hours and handed me $50. Derek's shoulders dropped. His hands came off the table and went to his lap. I know, he said, and it came out barely above a whisper. Dad, I know. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for 2 weeks, and I can't find the words. Then don't look for words, I said. Just tell me the truth. Did you know before that Saturday that I wasn't going to be at that table? He looked at me for a long moment. And this time, unlike that afternoon in his living room, he didn't look away. His eyes were wet at the corners, and his voice came out rough and honest in equal measure. I knew it was Beverly's crowd, he said. I knew it was going to be her kind of evening. And I told myself you'd be fine waiting a little while. That it would be easier. He stopped. Started again. I told myself a lot of things that weren't true because they were easier than the truth. The kitchen was quiet around us. The kettle had long since finished. Outside, the October wind moved through the backyard, and I could hear it against the window above the sink. Easier for who? I asked. Derek pressed his lips together. His eyes spilled over just once, one quick loss of control, and he blinked it back hard. For me, he said. It was easier for me. I stood up, walked to the spare bedroom, and came back with the box wrapped in blue paper, white ribbon still intact. I set it on the table in front of him. He looked at it, then up at me. What is this? Owen's birthday gift. I brought it to dinner that night. It sat on the passenger seat the whole 3 hours. I pushed it gently toward him. Give it to him. Tell him it's from Grandpa. Derek's hands came up to the edges of the box, and he held it like it was something fragile. His chin dipped for a second, head going down, and when he looked back up, his eyes were glassy and his voice had gone to pieces around the edges. Dad, I'm not done deciding what comes next between you and me, I said. But Owen is not part of that equation. Whatever happens, that boy has a grandfather. That's not negotiable. Derek nodded. His throat moved as he swallowed. He looked down at the box with the white ribbon and didn't say anything for a moment, just held it with both hands, the way you hold something you know you don't deserve but can't bring yourself to put down. He left without finishing his coffee. I watched his headlights turn at the end of the block and disappear. Then I went back inside, stood at the kitchen sink, and looked out at the dark backyard, where 3 lavender starts were holding on in the cold October ground. Margaret always said love without limits wasn't love at all. It was just fear wearing a kinder face. I was done being afraid. October turned to November, the way it always does in Portland. More rain, less light. The sky settling into that particular Pacific Northwest gray that isn't dramatic enough to be gloomy, but is persistent enough to remind you it's there. I'd spent too many of those autumns watching it through a window, waiting for something. This year I went outside instead. The first Wednesday of November the 5th, I walked into the Bridgetown Veterans Club at 9 in the morning with a canvas tool bag over my shoulder and a box of supplies from Home Depot in my arms. Frank had mentioned 2 weeks ago that the club's electrical panel was throwing a breaker every time someone ran the coffee maker and the space heater at the same time. I'd told him I'd take a look. What started as taking a look turned into 2 hours of work, which turned into somebody asking if I'd ever thought about teaching, which turned into me standing in front of 7 people the following Wednesday morning, explaining the difference between a 15-amp and a 20-amp circuit. "Why does it matter?" asked a man named Gerald, 70 years old, Vietnam vet, the kind of man who had fixed his own truck for 40 years, but had never touched a breaker box in his life. "Because if you put a 20-amp device on a 15-amp circuit," I said, "and you don't trip the breaker, you cook the wire inside your wall. You don't see it. You don't smell it right away. But it's happening." Gerald squinted at the panel I'd mounted on the wall as a teaching example. "So the breaker's actually protecting you." "The breaker," I said, "is the one thing in your house that tells the truth when everything else is pretending to be fine." Frank, sitting in the back row with his coffee, caught my eye and raised his mug slightly. I kept my face straight. By the second Wednesday, I had 11 students. By the third, I had 14. Gerald had brought his neighbor, a woman named Dorothy, 78 years old, white hair, sharp eyes, who asked more questions than anyone else in the room and retained every answer. She reminded me of Margaret's third-grade students, the way Margaret used to describe them, the ones who leaned forward in their chairs, because the world was genuinely interesting to them. Owen came the last Saturday of October. I heard the front gate at 10 in the morning and went around from the backyard to the front and found him standing at the walk with his backpack on and his blue wool hat pulled down to his eyebrows. His cheeks were red from the cold, and his breath made small clouds in the November air. "Hi, Grandpa," he said. My heart just about gave out on me. Owen. I got the gate open and crouched down to his level, both hands on his shoulders. "Did you come alone?" "I took the 14 bus." He said it with the particular pride of someone who had done something they'd had to think hard about first. "It stops 2 blocks from here." I checked on Google Maps. I pulled him into a hug that I meant with every part of me. He hugged back hard the way kids do when they've been holding something in. I felt his small arms tight around my neck, and I thought about him saving a seat at that table, and about the junk drawer phone at 11:14 at night, and my eyes stung in a way I didn't try to hide because his face was buried in my shoulder anyway. "Come inside," I said. "I'll make hot chocolate." We sat at the kitchen table, same chairs. The kitchen smelling like cinnamon, the way it always had, because Margaret put it in everything, and I'd never stopped the habit. Owen wrapped both hands around his mug the same way I wrap mine, and I thought about Margaret saying something once about how you could tell who people learned from by watching the small things. "Dad said you and him are having a disagreement," Owen said. "That's one way to put it," I said. "Are you going to make up?" I looked at my grandson across the kitchen table. 8 years old, red-cheeked, hot chocolate mustache forming on his upper lip. The most honest person in any room he walked into, just by virtue of not having learned yet how to be anything else. "I don't know yet," I said. "But that's between your dad and me. It has nothing to do with you and me. You understand that?" Owen nodded seriously. "Dad gave me the robot Lego," he said. "He said it was from you." It was. It's the one I wanted. He looked up at me with those wide eyes. "How did you know?" "You told me 7 months ago," I said. "I wrote it down." Owen stared at me for a second, like that was the most remarkable thing he'd ever heard. "You wrote it down. When somebody tells me something that matters to them," I said, "I try to remember it." His face did something complicated, then something between understanding and a kind of quiet sadness that was too old for an 8-year-old to be carrying. He looked down at his mug and said softer than before, "Mom and Dad don't always remember stuff like that." I reached across the table and put my hand over his. "That's okay," I said. "That's what grandparents are for." We spent the next hour at the table building the first section of the robot kit together. Owen directing and me following orders, which was exactly the right distribution of authority. He laughed twice, real laughs, surprised and sudden, the kind that come out before you have a chance to hold them back. And each time it felt like something the house had been needing. When he left at noon to catch the 14 bus back, he stood at the gate with his backpack on and said, "Can I come back next week?" "Every week," I said. Standing invitation. He grinned that enormous, uncomplicated grin that was all his own nothing borrowed from either parent, and headed down the sidewalk toward the bus stop. I stood at the gate until he turned the corner. Then I went back inside and stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the 2 hot chocolate mugs still on the table. It was Halloween night, and the kids on my street were still running door to door in their little costumes, when Frank Delgado knocked on my back door at 9:30. He didn't ring the bell. He just knocked 3 slow, deliberate knocks the way a man knocks when he's carrying something heavy and doesn't know how to set it down. I opened the door and took one look at his face. Frank was a tough man. 22 years on the Portland Police Bureau, retired as a sergeant, seen things that would make most people lose sleep for a lifetime. But that night, standing on my back porch under the yellow porch light, his face was drawn tight, his jaw working like he was chewing on the words before he let them out. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "You look like you need coffee." "I need something stronger than coffee, Nathan." He pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table, rubbing both hands over his face. "But coffee's fine." I poured 2 mugs and sat across from him. The kitchen was quiet except for the occasional shriek of trick-or-treaters out front, and that little sound, children laughing, careless and free, felt strangely cruel against what Frank was about to tell me. "All right," I said, wrapping both hands around my mug. "Just say it." Frank looked up at me, his dark eyes steady but full of something I hadn't seen in them before. Something close to grief. "It's Claudia," he said. "She's gone, Nathan, and she took a lot with her." My chest tightened. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean she cleaned out the joint accounts she had with Derek, business and personal. Transferred everything to a private account in her name alone, then wired it overseas." Frank pulled out his phone and set it on the table between us, showing me a message from his contact at a downtown bank. My buddy Tom works in their fraud prevention department. He recognized Derek's name on a suspicious transfer alert and gave me a heads up. Claudia moved nearly $112,000 in 3 separate transactions over 2 days. The air went out of my lungs like I'd been punched in the gut. $112,000. I repeated, and my voice came out flat and hollow. "That's not all." Frank picked up his mug, but didn't drink. "The Lake Oswego house, Derek put it up as collateral for a business loan 18 months ago. A $240,000 loan. Claudia's name was on the application as co-borrower. 2 weeks ago, she filed a quitclaim deed transferring her ownership interest in the property entirely to Derek, and her attorney simultaneously sent a letter to the bank requesting a formal loan assumption review, knowing full well Derek couldn't qualify on his own. The bank still holds them both liable on the original note until the assumption is approved, which it won't be. She walked away from the asset and left him holding every dollar of the debt. I pressed my palm flat on the table to steady myself because my hand had started to tremble. She left him holding the entire debt. Every penny of it. Frank finally took a sip of coffee, then set the mug down hard. Derek came home Thursday night to a half-empty house. She took the furniture, the artwork, her car, which turns out was paid for by Cooper Harper Company funds. She left him a note on the kitchen counter. 3 sentences. Said the marriage wasn't working, she was moving on, and that her attorney would be in touch about the divorce. I pressed my knuckles against my mouth because I could feel the tears threatening to rise, and not the kind you'd expect. Not sadness for Claudia. Grief, a bone-deep, exhausted grief for my son. For the boy who had chosen wrong at every turn, who had let that woman and her family walk him away from his father, and who was now standing alone in a half-empty house with a $240,000 debt and a 3-sentence goodbye. Where is Derek now? My voice cracked on the last word. His neighbor saw him sitting in the driveway at midnight, Frank said. Just sitting there in his car. Didn't go inside for 2 hours. I stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen window, pressing one hand against the glass. Outside, a group of kids in ghost costumes ran past under the streetlight, laughing with that pure, uncomplicated joy that belongs only to the young. My reflection stared back at me, old, tired, and hollowed out. "Frank," I said. "Did he call me?" "No, not once in 3 weeks, and now this." My voice broke completely, and I didn't try to stop it. A tear slid down my cheek, and I let it go. That boy. That stubborn, foolish boy. Frank got up from the table and came to stand beside me. He didn't offer easy words, because Frank never did. Instead, he said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, turning away from the window. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. "But I know I can't leave him sitting in a driveway at midnight." "Nathan," Frank's voice carried a warning. "You have to remember what he let them do to you." "I know what he let them do." I picked up my mug again, needing something to hold on to. I haven't forgotten 1 second of sitting in that parking lot. I haven't forgotten the $50. I set the mug back down firmly. But he's still my son, Frank. That doesn't just go away because it hurts. Frank studied me for a long moment, and I could see the conflict in his face, the part of him that wanted to protect me fighting against the part that understood exactly what I was saying. "Then what's the line?" he asked quietly. "Where do you draw it?" "Respect," I said. "That's the line. I'll be his father until my last breath, but I will never again be anyone's chauffeur, anyone's ATM, and anyone's excuse for why their life didn't work out." I straightened my back, feeling the old familiar stiffness in my spine, and not minding it one bit. If he comes to me, it has to be honest. No manipulation, no Beverly whispering in his ear. Just my son, the one Margaret raised, standing in front of me and telling me the truth. Frank nodded slowly. "And if he doesn't come?" The question hung in the kitchen air. Outside, the last of the trick-or-treaters had gone home. The street had gone dark and quiet. And somewhere across the city in Lake Oswego, my son was sitting in the ruins of everything he had chosen over me. "Then I keep living," I said. "I keep teaching those classes at the Veterans Club. I keep planting things in Margaret's garden. And I trust that somewhere under all the damage those people did to him, the real Derek Cooper is still in there." I looked at Frank, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace exactly, but a kind of firm, quiet resolve. But that part that's not my work to do for him. He has to find his own way back. Frank picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and squeezed my shoulder once hard. "You're a better man than most, Nathan. You know that." I managed something close to a tired smile. "Margaret always said I was too stubborn to be anything else." After Frank left, I washed both mugs, dried them, and set them back on the shelf. Then I turned off the kitchen light and stood for just a moment in the dark, letting the quiet settle around me. I thought about Derek. I thought about Owen. I thought about the long months ahead. I thought he'll come. Not yet, but he'll come. And when he did, I would be ready. 4 days after Frank told me what Claudia had done, I was out on the front porch with my coffee at 7:15 in the morning, watching the November fog roll in off the Willamette, the way it always does this time of year, slow and gray and heavy, like the sky itself had grown tired. The lavender I'd planted in late October had taken root, and the 3 small clumps were holding steady against the cold, which gave me more satisfaction than I probably should have admitted. I heard the car before I saw it, the low rumble of a familiar engine, then the squeak of old brakes that had needed replacing for months. I set my coffee mug on the porch railing. Derek's gray sedan pulled up to the curb and sat there for a full minute before the door opened. When my son finally stepped out, I barely recognized him. He was wearing the same clothes he'd apparently had on for days, a wrinkled button-down shirt, dark circles under his eyes so deep they looked bruised, and a week's worth of stubble on his jaw. He moved like a man carrying a load that had gotten too heavy to walk straight under each step up my front path, slow and deliberate. He stopped once halfway up the path and stood there for a full second before continuing. I watched him from the porch and said nothing. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at me. His eyes were red and swollen, and I could see his lower lip trembling even from where I stood. "Dad," he said. And that one word, just that one word, cracked something open in the middle of my chest that I had spent 3 weeks carefully patching shut. I didn't move toward him yet. I gripped the porch railing and held my ground, because I had promised myself I would hear him first. Really hear him without rushing to fix it. "Derek," I said carefully, "come up here." He climbed the 2 porch steps and stood in front of me, and up close he looked even worse, like a man who hadn't truly slept or eaten properly in days. His hands were shaking, not the fine tremor of cold, but the full, uncontrolled shaking of a person whose nervous system had given up pretending everything was fine. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. "I've been sitting in that house for 4 days, and I couldn't stop thinking about everything. About you, about what I let happen. About—" He pressed the heel of his hand against his eye, trying to hold it together, but his face crumpled anyway, and he let out a sound that I can only describe as the sound of a grown man finally breaking in a way he'd been refusing to break for a very long time. He was crying. Not politely, not quietly. He was sobbing right there on my front porch in the November fog. His shoulders heaving, one hand pressed over his mouth, like he was trying to hold the sounds in and failing completely. I let go of the railing and stepped toward him, and I put my arms around my son. He was taller than me by an inch and had at least 40 pounds on me, but when I pulled him in, he folded like a child, bent his head down to my shoulder, and cried like he hadn't cried since he was 8 years old, and fell off his bike on Morrison Street and broke his wrist. I didn't say anything because there were no words for this moment. I just held on, feeling his whole body shaking against mine, and I told myself very firmly that I would not cry too, and I managed it barely by staring hard at the 3 lavender plants in the front bed and counting their leaves. After a while, the heaving slowed. Derek pulled back and dragged both hands down his wet face, looking mortified and exhausted and young in a way he hadn't looked in years. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw and thick. "Dad, I'm so sorry. Not just for this, for all of it. For the restaurant. For the $50. For every single time I let them treat you like you didn't matter, and I just—" He swallowed hard. "I just stood there." I guided him to the porch chairs and made him sit down. Then I sat across from him and leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and looked at my son directly. "Tell me everything," I said, "from the beginning, and don't skip the parts that make you look bad." Derek took a shaky breath, and then he talked. He talked for nearly an hour, sitting on my front porch, with the fog thickening around us, and the neighborhood slowly waking up. He told me about how Beverly had been the one who pushed Claudia into the idea of the dinner at the Capitol Grill. It was supposed to be a soft launch for a plan to get Nathan to transfer assets into the Cooper Harper consulting structure. He told me how Claudia had positioned it as a family celebration, and how he had told himself it was harmless, that I'd enjoy the outing, that he could manage everyone. He told me he hadn't known about the seating arrangement until they were already inside, and that when Justin Beverly's contact, the restaurant manager, told him there were only 4 confirmed seats, Derek had felt sick, but hadn't spoken up because Beverly was right there, her hand on his arm, squeezing. "She squeezed my arm," Derek said, his voice bitter and ashamed, and I shut my mouth, like I was 12 years old and she was telling me to behave. He pressed his fist against his knee. My own father was sitting in a parking lot for 3 hours in the dark, and I was eating a $40 steak and letting a woman who had no blood connection to you decide that you weren't worth a seat at the table. I felt my jaw tighten. My heart was doing something complicated, aching and burning at the same time. "And the $50, Derek's face contracted with visible pain. That was Claudia. She pulled the bills out of her purse before I could say anything, and He stopped and shook his head. No, I'm not blaming her. I had 2 seconds to say, put that away. I didn't. That's on me. He pulled something out of his shirt pocket and set it on the table between us. A folded envelope. Open it, he said quietly. I picked it up. Inside were $50, 2 20s, and a 10 and a single index card with Derek's handwriting on it. This was never okay. I was wrong. I'm sorry, Dad. My throat closed up so fast I couldn't speak for a moment. I folded the card back into the envelope and held it in both hands, pressing it flat between my palms, like I was trying to feel the weight of what it cost him to write those words. Derek. I finally managed my voice unsteady. This doesn't fix everything, I know. He met my eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw my son in them, not the carefully managed version he'd shown the world, but the real one. The one who used to follow me around the garage asking questions about circuit breakers. But I'm not asking you to fix it tonight. I'm asking if I can start. I looked at him for a long time. The fog had begun to lift just slightly at the edges. You can start, I said at last, and for the first time in months, the tightness in my chest loosened just enough to let me breathe. 3 weeks after Derek showed up on my porch, I was in the kitchen at 9:30 on a Saturday morning when I heard 2 sets of footsteps on the front path, one heavy and deliberate, and one quick and light, the kind that belongs to a boy who still runs everywhere he goes because the world hasn't taught him yet to slow down. My heart jumped before my brain even caught up. I opened the front door before they could knock, and there was Owen, 8 years old, cheeks red from the November cold, wearing a Portland Trail Blazers jacket, 2 sizes too big for him, and holding in both hands a lumpy, badly wrapped package covered in dinosaur paper and approximately 14 pieces of tape. Grandpa? He launched himself up the front steps and crashed into my stomach, with both arms squeezing so hard I let out an involuntary grunt and grabbed the doorframe to keep my balance. The laugh that came out of me was raw and sudden and completely unplanned, the kind of laugh that breaks out of you before you can decide whether you're ready to feel that good. Easy, buddy. I managed wrapping my arms around him and pressing my face into the top of his head. He smelled like maple syrup and cold air. My eyes went hot, and I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall in front of him. You're going to knock an old man down. You're not old, Owen said into my coat, absolutely certain about it. You're 72. Mrs. Patterson next door is 81 and she runs 5Ks. I heard Derek's voice from the bottom of the steps, rough with something he was clearly working to keep under control. Owen, let your grandfather breathe. He's fine, I said firmly, meeting Derek's eyes over Owen's head. He's perfectly fine. Derek stood on the front path with his hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, the way he always carried himself, when he was uncertain, a habit I recognized from when he was 15 and had broken a window in the garage and didn't know how to tell me. He looked better than he had 3 weeks ago. He'd shaved, slept, and put on a clean jacket. But his eyes still carried the weight of everything that had happened, and I suspected they would for a good while yet. Come inside, I said. Both of you, I just made a full pot. We settled at the kitchen table, Owen immediately commandeering the chair with the best view of the backyard, pointing out that my lavender had gotten bigger and asking if we could plant something else. Derek sat across from me and wrapped both hands around his coffee mug the way I do. And for a moment, looking at him, I felt something twist painfully in my chest, because he looked exactly like me at 44, and I hadn't let myself notice that in years. Grandpa! Owen pushed the dinosaur package across the table with great ceremony. This is for you. I made part of it myself. Dad helped with the hard part. I pulled at the tape, all 14 pieces of it, while Owen watched with barely contained excitement, bouncing one knee under the table and gripping the edge with both hands. Inside the wrapping was a small wooden picture frame, clearly handmade, painted an uneven but enthusiastic navy blue. Inside the frame was a photograph I hadn't seen in years, me and Margaret at Cannon Beach. The summer of 2019, both of us laughing at something off-camera, the Pacific Ocean blazing silver behind us. My throat closed completely. "Owen," I said, and my voice came out barely above a whisper. "Where did you find this?" "Dad had it," Owen said, leaning forward earnestly. "I found it in a box in the garage, and I asked if I could use it, and he said yes. I painted the frame at school. Miss Guerrero let me use the good paint." I looked up at Derek. He was staring at his coffee mug, jaw tight, blinking more than he needed to. "I kept a few things," Derek said, his voice low and strained. "When Claudia was packing up, I kept a box of photos. I didn't tell her. I wasn't going to let all of it go." A tear broke loose before I could catch it, sliding down the side of my face and dropping onto the back of my hand. I didn't wipe it away. I just looked at the photo of Margaret, her head thrown back, laughing, her hair wild in the sea wind, and I said quietly, "Thank you, son." Derek finally looked up, and his eyes were bright and wet. "Dad, not now," I said, not unkindly. "Right now we're going to drink our coffee, and Owen is going to tell me about the painting project. And then I'm going to show him the lavender. We can talk later." I set the frame carefully on the kitchen counter where I could see it. "But this..." I touched the edge of the navy blue wood. "This is the best gift I've gotten in a long time." Owen beamed so wide his whole face crinkled up, and he immediately launched into a detailed explanation of the specific shade of blue and why he had chosen it navy, because it was the color of Grandpa's blazer at the restaurant that night. Though he said it the way an 8-year-old says it, not knowing the weight those words carried. Derek's face contracted sharply when Owen said that. He pressed his lips together hard and looked away toward the window, and I saw his Adam's apple move as he swallowed. I reached across the table and gripped my son's forearm once firmly, and then let go. There was a long road still ahead of us, but we were at last walking the same direction. By the second Saturday of December, Portland had committed to winter, the way it always does not, with drama or heavy snow, but with a steady, pewter-gray cold that settles into your bones and makes everything feel quieter, older, and somehow more honest. The lavender in the front bed had gone dormant, pulling all its energy down into the roots to wait out the dark months. I understood that more than I probably should have. I was turning the last garden bed with a hand fork at 9 in the morning when Frank Delgado came around the side gate. No knock, no call ahead, just the familiar squeak of the latch and the sound of his boots on the stone path. "You're out here early," he said, pulling his jacket collar up against the cold. "Couldn't sleep past 7. I kept working. "You want coffee?" "Already had 3 cups. He crouched beside the bed, picked up a handful of dark soil and turned it over in his palm the way men who've worked with their hands all their lives tend to do. "This is good dirt. Margaret always said this was the best corner of the yard," I said. "Full morning sun sheltered from the east wind. She grew tomatoes here every summer without fail." "You going to plant again in spring?" "Tomatoes. And maybe sunflowers." Owen asked about sunflowers. Frank set the soil down and stood, and I could see from his expression that he hadn't come to talk about gardening. His jaw was set, eyes steady, the look of a man carrying news he'd been turning over carefully before letting it out. "Martin called me," he said, "about the demand letter to Richard." I set the hand fork down, and Richard Harper settled, paid the full $24,200 principal plus Oregon statutory interest wired directly to Martin's trust account, received Thursday. Frank's mouth curved into something just short of a smile. Apparently Beverly was not happy. Martin said Richard's exact words were, "I'd rather pay the old man than explain this in a Multnomah County courtroom." Something warm moved through my chest, not triumph, but a solid, quiet satisfaction. Like setting down a load you've been carrying longer than you realized. "Good," I said simply. "There's more." Frank crossed his arms. The co-guarantor withdrawal on the First National loan went through, confirmed in writing, delivered to Martin's office Wednesday, and the Cooper Harper equity sale closed Friday. $85,000 cleared into your account. I straightened up and looked at my backyard, the turned beds, the dormant lavender, Margaret's corner waiting for spring, and breathed out slowly, watching the vapor dissolve into the December air. That's done then, I said. All of it. Frank studied me. How do you feel? I turned the hand fork over in my hands. Like a man who finally finished a job that went on too long. Not angry. Not satisfied the way people expect. I looked at him. Just finished. That's probably the healthiest thing you could have said. Frank replied, his voice quiet with something close to admiration. We were still standing there when the back gate opened a second time. Derek stepped into the yard carrying 2 cups from the coffee cart on Division Street. He'd learned years ago that showing up with something in his hands was better than showing up empty. Behind him, Owen came charging through in rubber boots, making straight for the garden beds, with the unstoppable energy of a boy who'd been cooped up in a car for 20 minutes. Don't stomp on the lavender, I called. I'm not stomping, I'm inspecting, Owen declared, crouching beside the dormant plants with tremendous seriousness. Derek handed me a cup and nodded to Frank. Morning, morning. Frank clapped Derek once on the shoulder, the way men who don't say much communicate what matters, then said, I'll leave you to it. Nathan, I'll see you Tuesday at the Veterans Club. Tuesday, I confirmed. After Frank left, Derek and I stood side by side watching Owen conduct his self-directed inspection tour. We drank our coffee, and the quiet between us was the right kind, not the hollow, painful quiet of men who've run out of things to say, but the full, breathing quiet of men slowly finding their way back to the same ground. Dad, Derek said, eyes still on Owen. I'm going back to work next week. Project management independent contractor. Small firm downtown, but it's a start. He paused. I found an apartment in Northeast, close to Owen's school and close to you. My throat tightened. I'd like that, I said. Derek reached into his jacket and held out a $50 bill, crisp, folded, once no envelope. Just the bill in his open hand. Not as repayment, he said, his voice rough. Just so that every time you think about that parking lot, there's something that comes after it. Something that means I know what I did wrong. I took it, folded it, and pressed it into my shirt pocket next to my heart, where I keep the things that matter. We're not even, I said quietly. Not everything gets fixed with money or sorry. I know, Derek said, and his voice broke on the second word. But we're moving, I said. That's what counts. Owen spun around, muddy boots, and all with the urgent expression of someone who has just remembered something critically important. Grandpa, are we still planting sunflowers in spring? The laugh that came out of me, full and warm, rising from somewhere deep in my chest, where the hurt used to live, filled up that whole cold December yard. Yeah, buddy, I said, my voice thick with everything I didn't need to name. We're planting sunflowers. I'm 72 years old, and I've learned something I wish I hadn't needed to learn the hard way. You can love someone completely and still lose yourself in the process if you let them. I let it happen for too long. I told myself it was patience. It wasn't patience. It was fear dressed up in a father's coat. If there's one thing I want you to take from this family story, it's this: dignity is not something anyone can give you back once you've handed it away. Guard it. Not with anger, but with the same quiet, steady love you'd give anyone worth keeping. I'm a man of faith, and I believe God doesn't remove people from your life to punish you. Sometimes He removes them to protect you, even when it hurts more than anything you've ever felt. Don't be like I was. Don't wait until you're sitting alone in a dark parking lot at midnight before you decide your own name matters. You matter before that moment. You matter right now, exactly as you are. These grandpa stories are not here to make you angry at the people you love. They exist to remind you that every relationship, including the ones built on blood, must stand on a foundation of respect. Every grandpa stories you hear, every family story you carry, every family story passed quietly from one generation to the next. They all point to the same truth: love without respect is just a habit, and some habits need to be broken. That is my personal belief. 72 years of living have not changed it once. If this grandpa stories found you at the right moment today, drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe every real family story deserves to be told with honesty and heart, hit subscribe so you never have to miss what comes next. This has been One Man's Truth. I hope it was worth your time. Thank you truly, and from the bottom of my heart, for staying with me until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements carefully crafted for the purpose of education and emotional reflection. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, you are warmly invited to step away and find something that serves you better. No hard feelings, and absolutely no judgment.